Well, welcome to the Leadership Lounge. It's great to have you here with us again, and I'm delighted that we've got Anna Hennell-James back with us. And for those of you who've been with us before, you know that Anna is a retired Academy Trust CEO and a good friend of mine. So Anna, it's great to have you back.
It's lovely to be back. Thank you for having me.
And we were chatting over coffee, weren't we? And we thought, what topic shall we explore in the Leadership Lounge? And someone had said to you they could really do with hearing about how you lead when you don't have the badge. So that's
when you're not officially a leader.
When you're not officially a leader, how do you lead? Yeah. So that's our topic, leading without the badge. So you haven't got an official title, there's no one that reports to you, but how do you still exhibit leadership? How do you lead sideways? How do you lead up to people that you report to? And for those that they haven't given that formal leadership title, it's a way that you can still lead yourself and influence others. So that's what we're going to explore today. So before we kind of explore how we lead our peers with no badge, we really need, I think, to explore kind of what leadership is, because I think if you just view leadership as the title, then you're missing a huge part. So if we unpick a little bit about what makes you a leader, and for me, the really great leaders are ones that have presence, and that might be a good place for us to kind of start. They've got a real sense of presence rooted in their purpose, and that generates that sense of authority. So let's start there. Anna, leaders with presence, have you met any? And kind of what brought about that presence in them, do you think?
I've been privileged enough to work with some really amazing leaders in all sorts of different roles, both, my professional and then the volunteer work I do. And even just in, sometimes in day-to-day life, you meet somebody that you think, actually, you're a really good leader. Head teachers in the classroom, chairs of boards, people in charities, people that are taking responsibility, have a strategy, have got a big picture and have a strategy. But also, I think on the small scale, you and I would both have sat in meetings where the chair makes or breaks it. If that chair has presence and leadership, we all understand why we're sitting around the table, why we're giving our time, what the aim is, what we expect to have achieved by the end of it. If that person doesn't have presence, it just, it's not a meeting, it's just a chat fest or a moan fest or an argument fest, and nothing happens. So it's about people knowing the direction of travel, what you're trying to achieve, being able to communicate that and helping gently steer people along that pathway, really.
So is it, what brings about their presence from what you're saying then, is a sense of them knowing their direction?
Yeah, having that real sense of purpose and knowing why they're doing what they're doing, which then influences why we're all doing what we're doing. In order to try and achieve that, that bigger aim. And just, the way that I suppose that authority sits on their shoulders, the way they carry that, the way they manage people, the way they behave fundamentally. So, and what about you, Colin? You'll have sat in plenty of meetings and encountered plenty of leaders.
Yeah, and there are some really interesting ones when I look back. So interestingly, my family were chatting to me the other day and we were talking about the first deputy head I worked under. It was a guy called Jerry Day, and he was the archetypal. It was a prep school, my first teaching post, and he was your archetypal prep school deputy head. He had his tweed jacket with the patches on the elbows, half moon glasses, and I always remember a moment where he'd called for some children to come to see him because they'd been up to mischief, and they arrived at the staff room door, and so he was called for and he came to the staff room door and he just looked at them. He looked his head down over his half moon glasses at them, and they just splurged all their crimes to him. And I did this and then I did this and whatever, and he just listened. And he waited till they finished, and I'll never forget it. He just went, that wasn't why I called to see you, but we'll talk about that later. So they just confessed sins they didn't need to. Yeah. But in him, it was just this sense of knowing who he was. So it was a really clear identity. He drew upon all these years of experience. And I guess it comes back a bit to that clear purpose you talked about. Other people that I met who I think are great leaders, there's this sense of calm about them, because again, I think it's they know their identity, they've learnt from their experiences. There's almost a sense they don't need to prove themselves either, because I've been there, I've done it. I don't need to prove to you. I just know.
I just know, and I just do it.
Yeah, that sense of presence comes from the wisdom they've gained from experience, and still there's a really clear sense of what I'm here to do. So in the case of looking at Jerry Day, the one I mentioned earlier, he knew he was deputy head. He knew his role was to create a sense of order and discipline, but most importantly, that the children learnt. And so he held them to account. And actually, when I watched him, I learnt a lot from him in terms of when I was then a teacher and a head teacher. He would just ask them questions, so they really reflected on them. And they were scared silly because he carried his reputation beforehand. So I think that's, again, leaders of presence really understand what they're there for as part of that process. And the greatest ones have just had this sense of calm, no need to prove anything.
It's that they just kind of exude it, don't they? If you have it within you and you can exude it to others, then it stops in some respects, I suppose, that questioning. Not that leaders shouldn't be questioned and they should be open and take on board, but it's just that quiet authority that kind of says, I've got this. And certainly in moments of, when I've been in situations that have been very challenging, what you want is somebody that you're looking at them thinking, you have got this. You're not looking at them and thinking, oh, you have not got a clue and this is all going to go pear-shaped. It's just that quiet calm of, I've got this. Nobody needs to panic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's really important, if we're thinking for our listeners and our watchers around how do I lead without the badge, drawing from that, it is about this sense of purpose and values. So a lot of the work that I do with clients, some of the early work we do is really helping people explore what's your passionate purpose. Because I think if you get that, what is it that I bring to the world, that brings you that sense of authority. So like in my case, I know my passionate purpose is to empower, whether that's coaching, whether that's training, whether that's podcasts. It's to empower people to understand things a bit more clearly, understand situations a bit better as part of that process. And I think the other aspect I like to help people explore is what are the core values that drive you? Because again, if you understand that, when you come to a situation, what brings that sense of calm in people is, I know what I'm here to do. In my case, it'd be to empower people in this situation, to feel they have agency, even if it feels like it's not. And I know the values I stand for. So in my case, it's integrity and authenticity and curiosity. Okay, what could this look like? What could we do? Curiosity would drive me in the questions I might then ask. And so I think if you've got hold of those, that allows you that sense of presence. It allows you as well, for those who don't have the badge, if we're coming in just knowing clearly, right, my role here is to, and the values I stand for are this, it drives you. And again, going back to people and experiences of that presence, I can remember many years ago, my wife dislocated her jaw. She had a weakness in it. She yawned and it got stuck. So we had to go to the hospital. And we'd gone to casualty and then taken through to a specialist part. And the doctors there were trying all the techniques and they just couldn't unlock it. So my poor wife had been stuck with her jaw open for 2 hours. Well, you just try doing that for 2 minutes and you'll realise, oh my word, how painful that is. And so she was in agony. The doctors were bemused. So the consultant was called for. And the consultant turned up and it was almost like this breeze of calm came into the room, because he knew there's all his wisdom and experience, but there's this sense of he knew what his purpose was here. And what was really interesting is the doctor then tried to explain, look, we've done it by the book and it's not worked. And the consultant knew his role was not just to free my wife from pain, but was also to educate his doctors. And he just very calmly and very politely said to his colleague, I know that's what the book says, but we don't always do it by the book, and there is a better way. Let me show you. And then he just turned to my wife and he said, this will all be over very soon, my dear. And it just, his voice was elixir, and I'm remembering, I know it was to her. Yeah. And he just literally, like, it was almost magic fingers, you know, he sort of rubbed the cheek, and it just sort of, I'm exaggerating for effect, but within literally seconds she was freed up.
Yeah.
And then he took time to obviously make sure she was okay, but explain to his colleagues. So there's a sense that he knew his purpose was not only to ease the pain and suffering, but his purpose was to educate.
So that next time they'd be able to...
They could do it quicker and she wouldn't be in pain.
And he wouldn't need to be called.
Yeah, so that sense of purpose drove his presence. Now, we're talking here about experienced people, consultants, etc., experienced deputy heads. And we're obviously doing this for people who aren't wearing the badge, but the same thing happens. If you can tap into what's my passionate purpose, what are the values I stand for, therefore what am I bringing to this, that gives you that ability to lead. Yeah. So Anna, in your experience then, how do we develop this natural authority? Because we're talking about it with some of the big experienced players, but we want to transpose that for people who don't wear the badge. So how do you develop that natural authority?
I think it comes from a place of knowledge. And, you've talked about purpose, knowing what your purpose is, vision, but actual knowledge of the system or organisation or whatever the field you're working is. You need to have some knowledge of that. So it's kind of gathering that, taking opportunities to, feed your mind, build that skill set so that when opportunities are there, you've got something to bring and to feed into situations. And it's understanding the sense of direction of the organisation. So I guess, when you get there and you're not wearing the badge, it's about being aware of what's going on around you, about what other people are doing, not just being, blinkered on what your role is. It's having your head up and taking that wider view of what's going on. So you've got that greater understanding as well as holding on to your own authenticity and purpose.
I love the blend you're talking about there. So there's a sense of you gaining and developing your own aspect of knowledge. So certainly if you're leading without the badge, you may not be massively experienced, but what is your experience? What is your knowledge? What are you honing as your specialism and bringing that to, this is what I can lead into this. And I love the way you've also talked to them about knowing that global purpose of the organisation. So there's a sense there of what's the organisation's purpose and the direction. What's my purpose, my knowledge, my experience that I'm gaining, and what can I contribute to the global purpose? And therefore you lead in that aspect to contribute towards the direction of where the organisation's going. So I think that we can all do that, can't we? Whatever experience that we've got as part of that. Yeah, brilliant. So that's how we might start to generate this natural kind of authority and presence, and as you just talked about, tapping into a specialism. I think a key aspect of when we're leading others actually starts with leading ourselves. Whether you're leading with a badge or whether you have a badge, you can't lead others unless you're actually leading yourselves. And so we've got to develop that kind of how we develop our mindsets, etc. And I was talking to a client the other day, and we were just talking about how we can draw people to us, how we lead naturally. And we were talking about the importance of authenticity, leading authentically as ourselves, bringing our own style, our own humour, not trying to be somebody else. Having integrity, holding on to what's right, even if you could get away with what's wrong, and then modelling our example and natural enthusiasm. So when we start leading ourselves with holding on to integrity, being ourselves and leading in that particular way, then we can start to lead others. But so the bit now is focusing on ourselves. So Anna, where do we start from your experience about leading ourselves?
I think that it's all about self-awareness and knowing yourself, and knowing how you react and respond, and giving yourself time to reflect on that, because you have to be authentic and true to yourself. And if you are a very lively, bubbly person, it could be really hard to try and squash that if you think in terms of, I want to be a leader, so I've got to be quite, I suppose, like, poker faced and keep distance and stuff. That generally doesn't work. It is about being yourself, but reflecting on your attitudes and behaviours and your reactions to things. So I would say, listen to that inner voice. Talk to yourself. I spend a lot of time talking to myself, but it's that think it through, verbalise it, think about what other people might be perceiving, because you might mean something one way, but the way you present it could be perceived in a different way, and you need to be aware of those things so that as you are going about your day-to-day, doing your role, whatever that might be, you are presenting the version of yourself that you want to present, that is going to enable you to then get people alongside you and start to influence them.
So that fits really well with this whole kind of phrase that I often use, who do I want to be? Almost what story do I want to tell? And then just not in a neurotic way, because you don't want to do this, it's like holding a rev counter, isn't it? You don't want to go over the top and constantly beating yourself up, but just this, who do I want to be? And there's a sense, there's a brilliant phrase that Trevor Waldock, good friend of mine, talks about, who am I becoming? And so who do I want to be? Who am I becoming? How did I perform against that? What worked well there? What do I need to tweak a little? So that curiosity and reflection about yourself then helps you to lead yourself.
And if you can lead yourself well, then you will have the capability to start to lead others. And I think it's, listen to yourself, listen to other people. If you have trusted people, ask them for some feedback. How did I do? How did you think that came across? Was that clear, clear enough? Did people understand what I meant?
And that is a brilliant piece of advice. It's finding yourself some trusted, I call them guardians, people that are for you, but will also call you out to stop you going over the edge. So I talk about guardians and guardrails with people. Your guardrail is the system that stops you falling off the edge, and your guardian is the person that stops you falling off the edge. And they need to be somebody that will call it straight with you, but with love, so you know you're safe with them. So I guess we'll come to top tips later on, but there is a tip here around find yourself trusted people, surround yourself with some of them that will give you that feedback to say, how were you in that moment? That will call it on you, but equally that you can go to them and ask, as you said. So I really want to emphasise that for our listeners. Really good tip there.
And I think it is, when you listen to other people, it's important to be open, to take on board other views, suggestions, strategies. But you do have to hold true to your own vision, purpose, beliefs. What you don't want to be doing is what I call the old flip-flop. And I did work with someone, and it was really challenging to work with this person, because they would do whatever the last person in the room had said was a good idea. So you'd all be setting off in one direction because somebody had come in and said that, and then by next week, someone else has suggested, so now we're doing that. So actually your direction is never a straight line. You were weaving all over the place because the leader change their mind every 5 minutes, and that is not, sometimes decisions have to be reversed. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but when every single decision is dropped as soon as something seemingly better is put on the table, that does not help people. Sometimes you have to stick to your guns, ride it out. It might take time to embed or to have the impact you want, but just keep flip-flopping from one thing to another doesn't help anybody.
And flip-floppers generally are because they're not rooted in something. They haven't got a good foundation. So what that highlights to me, particularly for those of us looking, how do I lead without the badge? How do I lead myself? How do I hold on to that kind of reflective nature in myself? It's about really digging deep then and putting in the foundations in yourself. What are my moral principles? What are my stones of life? What are my stones of leadership that drive this? where have I got this from? Where have I seen really good models? What do I want to create as my core structure?
Yeah.
Excuse me. If you get rooted in that, and certainly before you get the badge, but even once you've got the badge, just checking, have I got the foundations? Are there any bits I want to tweak or adjust? But getting the root in that enables you to not flip-flop either character or in behaviour or in leadership decisions, because you're rooted in something good. So again, another tip for people is really think about, what are my foundations? What are my foundations about character? What are my foundations about leadership? Yeah, key part. Yeah, good. So what about heart and character then, Anna? Because for me, again, some work I've done, and I'll talk a little bit in a moment about some brilliant work by a charity, Emerging Leaders, and it's one of the key things they talk about, that as leaders we need a heart for others, and we need a character that's rooted in integrity. So how do we shape that, our heart and our character?
I think it's about honesty to others, being honest with yourself. It's about courage to do the right thing as a leader at whatever level, and whether you have the badge or not. Sometimes you have to make really hard decisions, but if it's the right decision for the vision, for the organisation, it's what you have to do. You can't avoid it, because somebody might be upset, or because you might have, you might meet some resistance. So it's having that courage. It's behaving with kindness and compassion, which doesn't mean smothering people with love, and same as with children, loving them doesn't mean never saying no to them.
Yeah, just listen to our last podcast on kindness. Absolutely.
But it is around having that within you. And I think as well, it's a lot about humility. Just because somebody gave you the badge doesn't mean now you're the world's greatest leader and you're never going to make mistakes. So it is that being in tune with what you're doing, listening to the people around you, taking on board what they're saying, reflecting on it, not necessarily following suggestion or doing it, but at least listening, because there is nothing worse than a leader that says, well, I'm in charge and therefore I've got all the answers, because that's very rarely the case. So I think, a good dose of humility in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, the importance of character particularly is kind of shaped. And it's very easy for your character to be affected negatively. Again, some brilliant work by Emerging Leaders. They talk about how our character is shaped by our thinking. So our thoughts lead to feelings. We have a thought about something, we feel something about that, we then put that into action, and the more we do that thought, feeling, action, it becomes a habit, and the more we do that habit, it becomes our character. So if we're looking at how do we ensure our character remains wholesome, it is about thinking about our thinking. And they use a great phrase about your character is like a garden, you need to weed it every day. Because if we're not careful, there can be tiny little thoughts that come into mind. Oh, I could take this little shortcut, or oh, I think this about this person, they were annoying, aren't they, or so and so. And if we let those thoughts keep coming in, it will create actions in us that then become a habit and become part of our character. So it's about not allowing the kind of weeds of unwholesome bits about our character. It's about that daily reflection and just thinking, hang on, was there anything in my character today that wasn't helpful? Was there anything in my thinking today that wasn't wholesome? And so that we weed that out, and we're mindful of it, and mindful of a focus to keep our character wholesome as part of that process. So for me, I think really, if you want to generate that in yourself, it is about really being cautious about and focusing on your thoughts. Because if you let those thoughts take hold that are unhelpful, it then does shape your character negatively.
And it can take over, can't it?
Yeah.
So it's just, it can be challenging when you are flat out busy at work, but it's just taking that few minutes for that self-reflection, self-awareness. Was I being the best version of me today? If I behave in that way, will that make me a better person or not? And if the answer is not, then maybe that's not the best route to be going down. So we've chatted about that, Colin, and clearly leading ourselves is tough and we need to be resilient. So how do we manage our mind and those thoughts that come in?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier the work from Emerging Leaders. So it's a brilliant charity, and our listeners might want to look it up, emergingleaders.net, and they do work around developing leadership in the poorest communities in the world to help them with the challenges they face. And they talk about 7 leadership mindsets, which I think are brilliant, which help, I think, us with resilience. So the first one is lift up your head. So when actually all the plop around you is going on, we tend to look down, and when we look down, all we see is the kind of plop in front of us. We don't gain perspective. So the first mindset is, when you're in the midst of these challenges, lift up your head, have a look around you, see who's available to support you, have a look at what was in the past that helped, but also look ahead. Where's the good stuff coming in ahead, so that you gain perspective. The next one is to see yourself as a leader. It's all well and good in these challenging moments. We tend to see ourselves as a victim, but see yourself as a leader, and you think, well, I don't feel like a leader because this is really tough. Then you ask yourself, what would a good leader think, say, and do in this moment? Who do I know and that I think is a good leader? How would they respond? Oh, well, if they would respond like that, then I could respond like that and admit that I'm a leader. And you might take those actions you think would be helpful. So that's a thing that helps you in the midst of the challenge, is those kind of first 2. The next one is like, be proactive. That helps resilience by looking ahead, planning ahead, and putting things in. Fourth one, see and take responsibility. See stuff in your life and take responsibility for it. See what's going on, and even if it's not yours, take responsibility for it. I mean, that's a great one as well for those who want to lead without the badge.
Yes.
Not that you're running around grabbing everybody's job, but if you see something that isn't working, is falling, that is going to go a bit wrong. Step into that space, deal with it, or talk to others. Oh, I've just spotted this is what I've done with it. That's a great way you can lead without the badge. But it's also a great way that you lead yourself, because you're taking responsibility for things. Change something is their next one. So actually, if something isn't working for you, change it. If you're doing a certain action but it's leading to a consequence that isn't particularly helpful, then change it. And if you're working with that reflection we talked about earlier, how was I today, what worked well today, what didn't, well, that didn't, well, then I need to not just do the same thing and expect a different outcome. I need to change it. Focus is their next one, really thinking, what is it I need to change, and put your energy into changing that as part of that process. And then the last one is appreciative thinking. What's working well? What could be even better? And there's that sense of, in reflection, what worked well today? What do I need to do even better? So I think their 7 mindsets that they generate in their work are brilliant examples for all of us to use. But particularly if you want to lead without the badge and you want to lead yourself first, when you're in those tough times, those are great to dip into, but they're also good proactive ones that if you're constantly using those 7 mindsets and get into the swing of those, actually it starts to help you to thrive. I mean, that's what great resilience is. It isn't just surviving the tough bit. It is about thriving in the challenging bits. And being able to lead ourselves in those challenging moments is really key, actually. That's what will attract us to others, and it's what will give us that sense of presence. So that ability to not only lead in the challenging bits, but then flow that through so that it actually changes and develops us as people is really key.
And I was fortunate enough to do some work with Emerging Leaders with you many years ago now, and it still sticks with me, the first training session when they talked about chickens and eagles. And actually, if you're head down just looking in it when it's all challenging, going wrong, you cannot get the bigger picture and see it. It's about, don't be a chicken, head down and pecking at the ground. Be an eagle, lift your head up, soaring above. And that has stayed with me for so long, and there have been so many situations when it's all been getting a bit much, and I'm like, right, don't be a chicken, be an eagle. It just gives you that something to hold on to and helps you lift yourself up and go, right, this is a great big pile of plop, but let's get above and see and start finding a way forward.
And that's a really great way that we can lead, whether we have the badge or don't have the badge, because there's a sense then when all hell is breaking loose for everybody, if you're the one that is just pressing pause, lifting your head up and gaining that wider perspective, you will bring a sense of hope. And hope in those moments are key for leadership.
And it's just such a good visual, isn't it? Of like chicken, eagle, chicken. I'm going to be an eagle, not a chicken.
So again, if our listeners want to take something today, be an eagle, not a chicken. Yeah, brilliant. So Anna, in your experience, how do we keep ourselves fueled and on the straight and narrow when we're in moments?
It's hard, but I think it's about feeding your mind when you have opportunities, read stuff, find out, learn, so you've got more to draw upon, and having the right people around you. And particularly if you're leading without the badge, you may well be in a situation where you have no control over the people who are around you. But what you do have control over is how you react and interact with those people. And so, for example, if you work in an organisation where people huddle at the water cooler to moan about the boss or just generally whinge about something, or where there are whispered conversations in corners and it goes quiet when people walk past, you have a choice around whether you join in with that or whether you ignore it. So you can't control the people around you, but how you interact and what you do, you can control, and you make those decisions. And that's where it comes back to that self-reflection. Is going and standing at the water cooler and joining in with the gossip the right thing to do? Does it fit my moral purpose? And if the answer is hopefully no, then don't do it. You just don't have to get caught up in it.
I'm mindful of the phrase "you are what you eat," as you were talking there, that what you input into yourself, both in terms of what you're reading or listening to. We can recommend a great podcast. You're listening to it now. Listening to stuff like this, reading up quality stuff around personal development, character, etc. That input shapes your output. If you're spending time with the moaning myrtles at the water cooler, that input will equal your output.
What's feeding your soul.
And if you're in a place where actually there perhaps is a culture that is a little bit unhealthy, it's about where you source that, perhaps from outside, finding yourself some mentors or some companions who will support you and be that positive input, because what you take as your input will lead to your output, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So the next one is just moving on to this real root of the issue then, is about how you lead others with no power. So when we're working in a team and we're perhaps not the team leader, how do we influence and lead when we don't have the badge then? Just building on what we've talked about so far.
That I think is all about your actions and behaviours, effectively what you are modelling. Which version of you it is that turns up day in, day out, how you interact with people, how you, think about what you are putting into the organisation or the team, what you're asking for. And really, I think it's all about communication, how you are communicating, your needs, but also offering to help other people. If you can see somebody's really snowed under, do you have the opportunity to go, I can see you're really busy, is there something I could do that would get it off your desk? It's things like that. So it's a lot around that communicating and persuading. So lots of leading without the badge is about the power of persuasion. So how do we go about persuading people effectively, Colin?
Yeah, I love what you talked about there. It is about the character and how you behave, but it's also then about the questioning and the language that we use. So if we're looking about communication and the persuasion elements, there's a brilliant book by a guy called Steve Adams called The 5 Prompts to Persuasive Power. And he's done loads of work working with advertising, and he's pulled out 5 key areas that enable us to persuade people. The first one is around a real sense of why in something. So not necessarily the what, but the why. So when you're talking to people about something, really rooting it in the reason that you're doing this or requesting something. The other thing that he talks about is a sense of contrast. So if you explain to people, look, this is what we're currently doing, but this is what we could do, and you lay them alongside each other. So we tend to think that people know what we're currently doing, so I'll just talk about what we could do. But by putting the two next to each other, contrast speeds up engagement. Look, we're currently doing this, this, and this, but this is what's happening. But if we were to change to this, this, and this is what could happen. So you're explaining to people the impact of what we're currently doing is this, but the impact of if we were to switch could be this. So contrast will speed up engagement. And then he also talks about effectively telling story that brings emotional connection. So you might then link it to, well, if we were to do this, imagine little Jimmy, and you tell a story about little Jimmy that you know those people are particularly connected to, and there is then this sense of emotional connection. So we persuade, and if we were just to root these down, just being really clear on our why.
Yeah.
Put things, this is what we're currently doing and what it could look like if we did this. So you've got that contrast.
And I think that's important because sometimes what people think they're doing, or what we think is going on, is not actually what is happening.
Yeah.
So if you're laying it out really clearly, that might help some people to see that actually things aren't going as they assume.
Yeah, and I think when you lay them out, it's about helping them understand that what we're currently doing has good and bad consequences. Because what they're currently doing, particularly if they're holding on to what they're currently doing, they're just seeing the good consequences. So you explain to them that this is what we're currently doing, good, but also bad. And then when you explain what it could look like, I think you need, again, that honesty. Yes, I know that if we were to switch to this, it would have this impact that perhaps they're worried about. So you hold that honesty and authenticity and integrity with them. However, it can also lead to this, and you explain the big advantage that will come from it. So I think you can help people understand that, look, any decision we make will have possibly, yes, both negative and positive, but actually the positive of this new way outweighs it alongside each other. So that clarity of really explaining what's actually going on at the moment as part of that contrast, I think, is really, really important. I think the other thing that I work with clients on when we're trying to persuade someone, so I do this when I do work with people around improving their CV and job applications, but it's also really important in conversation, is something called PSI. PSI is your pounds per square inch in your tire pressure, but it also stands for principle, story, impact in holding conversations or trying to persuade. So if you're trying to explain something to someone, tell them the principle that's driving it. In other words, I believe that, this is what's important here. Then tell a story which demonstrates that principle in action. So you might say, look, I believe our focus should be on X. So that's your principle. Then you tell a story about what that could look like or where you've done it already. And then the I bit, the impact. And when I did this, this was the impact. Or when we do this, this could be the impact. Because when people see the impact of something, they go, that actually sounds really good. But if we just say the principle, I think we should do X, what? You tell story, and story, what the brain scientists have done by putting probes and things on your head is that when I'm telling a story, the neuron activity in my head then gets mirrored in you as the listener. So if I'm telling a story with passion about this principle and how it could come to fruition, you actually feel it as much as hearing it with the neurons that are firing on in your head, the same as in mine. And when you start to talk about impact, people go, that sounds really good. So I think both the work of Steve Adams and my little bit of PSI, if you work on those kind of principles, and the key thing there is really about a why and a story, and if you can throw in some contrast, some Steve Adams stuff, you're more likely to get a speeded up engagement. That's how we can persuade. I guess one little warning I would put on that is we could do the Steve Adams stuff, we could do PSI and be actually quite manipulative about it. So authenticity is really key here. We're not doing this to manipulate, to persuade. No. We're doing it to try and make our message the most effective it can be. in order to get engagement, but it's not to manipulate people, it's to help them see it.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do that, whether you're wearing the badge or not, it has to be rooted in authenticity and integrity again. It's part of that process.
Yeah. And Colin, you've also led in charities, haven't you? Where there's no paid authority, so you're not being paid to do it.
Yeah, it's a different set of skills.
And I would imagine that, that brings its own challenges. Is there anything to be learnt from that kind of work?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because when you're doing charity work, where you're all there on charity, it's not that unpaid one of you is paid and some other, but when you're working with people who aren't paid, you can't say to them, well, we're going to have a tough conversation about your job description. Just go, well, fine, I'll go to another charity and help them instead. So it's really got to be, for me again, the key thing is about authentic connection. So really understanding the person, spending time and real genuine interest. And again, little kind of warning thing here, don't, I'm going to do some genuine interest in order to engage them. You've got to come from the heart. It's got to be really authentic. So authentic, genuine connection with people. And I think it's also then about truly listening to them as well. I mean, I think we talk a lot about what I say in communication, but the most powerful part is listening. If I really listen to understand someone, there is a massive power in that. If I listen to understand you, you feel valued.
Yeah.
And when you feel valued, you now feel connected to me. And because I valued you, and again, we're not doing this to manipulate, but because I valued you, you then also value me. And when I ask you to do something, you go, do you know what? That person's genuine. They're asking me to do something. They gave time and listened to me. I think there's someone that's worth following. So again, a top tip, really listen to understand people, not listen to answer them back, but listen to understand what they're actually saying. I think that's really good. And then when you listen to understand people as well, you can then speak into something when you want to help move something along. Because if I understand where you're coming from, I can then work like a really good Venn diagram. I work from the point of intersection. Right, I know where Anna's coming from here, so I'm going to start from there and then build it back to the direction of travel that I want us to go in. So that listening to understand builds that up. And I guess the last part I think I've learned from working in charity context is just to be passionate about what you're doing. Because if you talk passionately about the purpose, then people get infected by that passion. So if we're leading without the badge, but we're not talking passionately about it, then nobody's going to want to come with us. We're just going, I really think we perhaps should maybe go this way. And we're a bit like Eeyore. Then no one's going to do it. Now, neither do we want to be like Tigger. But we do need to sense this, actually, I think this could be really good. Just look at the impact this could have. And if we talk passionately about that, whether it's in a charity context or not, people are going to want to come there. So again, for those leading without the badge, what do I want? And let's talk passionately about it, because our passion will become infectious. So I think all those things would be my lessons from working with charities as well. So we're heading into our last bit around leading without the badge. And so we come to probably the trickiest one, which is how we lead up, how we lead our bosses. Now, that might seem a bit odd to our listeners and our watchers, but we do. Actually, it's a part of just being a human being is how we feed back, how we offer professional care and challenge to those above us. So maybe, for example, our bosses might be about to make a mistake, or something's going to go really wrong. They've missed something, or they haven't got a full picture. So, Anna, from your experience, how do we lead up in that moment? What are the key components?
Gosh, it can be hard, and you do need to sort of be bold, but you need to think carefully about how you communicate. I think this is one of those areas where communication is key. And when I was leading, I used to say to people, don't bring me a problem, bring me a solution. Don't just come and say to me, well, this isn't working. I want this doesn't appear to be working, and I think if we were to do this, it would make it better. So if somebody's actually offering you something, feels very different from if they're just going, this is a problem. That just feels like somebody else knocking at your door to come and have a moan. Which doesn't help anybody. So
I think sometimes in that one as well, certainly in my experience as a leader, when someone comes to me and says, look, I've spotted this has happened, I've done this and this.
Yeah.
So they're already brought part of that's already showing them I'm leading. And then they say, and I think we could do it. I could do X and Y, or we could do X and Y, and you're coming with a solution. So that blend of the two sometimes.
And you're sitting there as a leader going, hurrah,
fantastic.
Yes, thank
you so much. That A, you saw it and you took responsibility. So it brings back to that mindset again.
Yeah.
You did something, but equally you haven't gone maverick and made a mess of something, but you've done something, but bringing also a further solution. So that's a really great one.
And I think it can be tempting to be blunt, and I've led in meetings where I've got half a sentence out about a change that's coming, and someone's already gone, well, that's not going to work, is it? And you think, you haven't even let me finish. So being blunt probably won't be well received. So it's about thinking about how you phrase it. If something's been laid out and you really think they've missed a big bit or it's heading for disaster, then you are right to raise it, but it's doing it in the right way. So thinking about the communication aspect and how you're going to, don't just rush it in, have a bit, how am I going to, because this is my boss, how am I going to raise this? And it's something like, maybe you say, I can see the benefits in changing X, but I'm wondering what the impact on Y might be. And hopefully your boss has thought about the impact on Y, and they will be able to explain it to you. And then your concerns are, settled. Or if they haven't, the way you phrased it gives them the opportunity to go, do you know, that's a very good point, and, I'll come back to you on that, or we'll have a look at that. But you're not going in, sort of like head on going, that's not going to work, and you clearly haven't thought about that. So it's just that phrasing of it.
And it comes back to that word I mentioned earlier as one of my core values, curiosity. So that what you've said, you're almost saying, I'm curious. I can see how I benefit that, but what about this? And so it's using questions of curiosity can help. And again, it's understanding, why am I asking these questions? I'm asking these questions to make something better or stronger, not to make it smaller. So the person you mentioned earlier that just went, well, I don't think that's going to work, is pushing that down. Whereas your question of curiosity, I can see X would work. What about Y? You're doing that in order, either they have got it sussed and they can answer it, in which case great. If they haven't, it enables you to refine what's going to happen, make it better before it launches to make it successful. So we're driven by questions of curiosity in order to generate success, isn't it? And maximise what's going on here.
And I think if you are coming at it with that kind of questioning, it would be a rare leader that wouldn't accept and value that. Because you're not just criticising and saying it's not going to work and I don't want to do it. You're going, oh, okay,
And again, if you've got a leader that you know is slightly edgy, what I find helpful is to front load that question of curiosity of, I'd really like to help this be a success, so that the first thing they hear is you're on side. Or I really value you. Now, a key thing there is never to put the word but. It's always an and or a full stop or start the sentence. So you don't negate what you've just said. No buts. But front load a sentence as well. If you're thinking, I don't know how my boss is going to take this, front load it. I really would like this to be a success. I can see that X will really work because of this. Can I question why? And then by asking that question, but because you front loaded it, it's made it more receptive, and you feel more, I've given them the message. I'm not the enemy here.
Yes, I'm not coming to just moan or land another problem on their desk. Good.
Anything else around how we might lead up in those moments, Anna, or are those the key bits?
I think it's around just bearing in mind that hopefully your boss hasn't just come up with something for the sake of annoying everybody or change for change's sake. So, give them some credit for actually being effective leaders themselves when you are thinking about the things that maybe don't suit you or unclear. And sometimes it could be that they've given the broad brush strokes and haven't overloaded everybody in the first meeting with lots of detail. So again, if there's something you're concerned about and if you don't have enough detail, using the phrases of, I'm really keen to help make this a success, this is a really interesting proposal, could you perhaps explain a bit more about ABC? Because I don't think I've quite understood that. So you're not going, you haven't explained it very well. You're saying, I haven't understood it. And
So it's almost in order to help me, could
to
you
help
please?
you make it a success, could you please give me some more detail on that?
So it's interesting there, isn't it? It's around questions again.
Yeah.
It's around being really clear in why you're asking it. And the driver again is always because I want to make this a success, because I want to be able to kind of contribute the best way
and be part of making this organisation, system, business, whatever better.
So it's driven by that purpose of lifting it up, and it's driven by clarity. Great. And our last question before we come up with our top tips is we're leading up. Sometimes, sadly, you have the narcissist know-it-all leader. And so how do we lead with these tricky beasts? Because, who knows how they might respond.
I think this is probably one of the hardest things that any of us will kind of experience, in either working life or volunteering. I think it's that person that's like, I've got the badge, I'm in charge because I said so. Because none of us are perfect. None of us have all the answers, and they're not helping themselves or anybody else if that's how they're behaving. But I do think you need to be really careful, because those people can be very unpredictable. I would certainly never publicly challenge or call them out on it. I would do it privately, and I would probably, where possible, do it in writing, but these days by email, so there would be that paper trail, and you can't be accused of having said or done something you didn't. But also, I think if you are working with somebody like that and you feel you are trying to lead up and manage some of that, I would question whether that organisation is the right place for you to be. And I know you can't just drop it and leave, but that might be the point in which you start thinking, I need to be planning an exit strategy and finding an organisation that is more aligned to my values in terms of leadership.
I would echo that. I think it's about being really careful. I mean, some of the tips we've just talked about, front loading a sentence, valuing, making it really clear you value them as a person, asking questions of curiosity in order to help you to do it. So you're phrasing it very much. You have to be careful how often you then question though, because they will see that as a personal attack. If you're working, but it does then come to that bottom line: is this a safe place? Is this a wholesome place to work in with someone like that? So it's just looking after yourself in that moment as well, isn't it? But being very careful in the language that you're using with them. Well, let's move on to narcissists, because they probably weren't the nicest ones to end on, but we still have to look at that reality, because sometimes people might be needing to lead without the badge in that context. So we've explored lots of stuff. It's about leading yourself, first of all, isn't it? It's about generating that authority, which comes from that sense of knowledge, and you reflecting on that knowledge, developing your own little wisdom, even if it's only a niche wisdom. And to bring that. And so we've also just explored how you use language as well, both in your storytelling and prompting to engage people. We've just looked at that sense of connecting with people that are above us as well, and how we do that with respect, how we might front load a sentence, how we use curiosity and questioning. So there's a whole load of stuff we covered today, but we are at that point, Anna, sadly, the end of our session today, where we come up with the top 3 tips. So what are your top 3 tips for leading without the badge?
I would say, first of all and front and foremost, model it all the time. Leading yourself, seeing and taking responsibility, looking at where you can contribute something in all the time. We are all leading ourselves, and we can all bring some leadership to whatever we are doing. So consistently modelling it, because then other people see it. And in the same way that you've talked about habits then becoming character, if you are constantly modelling it, that becomes part of your character.
Absolutely.
So model it all the time. Secondly, I'd say look for opportunities to put yourself forward. I would caveat that with to put yourself forward appropriately. You do not want to be one of those people that say, me, I'll do that, me,
you don't want to be like Donkey on Shrek, which pick me.
So do it appropriately, and if there aren't opportunities being offered for you to, stick your hand up for, then go and have a conversation and say, I would like to start to develop myself as a leader. So if there are any opportunities for doing whatever, I'd appreciate it if you considered me. Then you're putting it out there. This is what I want. But yeah, take opportunities, no matter what they seem they might bring. Again, it's not about that manipulation. It's about building your own skills and modelling that for other people. And thirdly, be self-aware. Really, really key part. And even in a really busy day, try to find just 5 minutes to give yourself that regular review. How did I do today? How did I react to that? That person was really annoying me. Did I manage to have that conversation with them without showing it? Or do I think, my actual feelings were leaking out a little bit? That self-review and self-reflect really goes a long way in helping you develop those leadership skills.
Yeah, I totally agree. That whole who am I becoming, and that you don't suddenly become a leader.
No.
It happens over time.
Yeah.
And you might look without the badge at people who've got the badge and go, oh, aren't they amazing? I could never be like that. Well, they were once where you were, and they got to that position by self-reflection and growing both their identity as a person, but also their identity as a leader, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that starts with reflecting regularly on that character. Yeah, brilliant. So super top tips, Anna. Thank you again for joining us in the Leadership Lounge.
It's been lovely to be back.
Yes, always lovely to have a cup of tea and coffee in the Leadership Lounge with you and chat these things through. And thank you for joining us in the Leadership Lounge today. We've loved having you just explore how you lead without the badge. We hope that you'll join us again next month in the Leadership Lounge.